Today, you could have $20 or $20 million and get access to the same quality returns as the biggest institutions in the world. The best opportunities aren't necessarily the most highly probable opportunities. The best opportunities are the ones that are most inadequately priced. The 2 and 20 asset management is a $700 billion a year industry. Even disrupting that a small amount would create a wildly successful business. Every asset manager is trying to hire analysts in order to get an edge in the markets. And what our edge is that we've developed technology that allows us to look over the shoulder of all of those smartest alpha producers and take that understanding and translate it into investment products. I'm Bob Elliot, and this is Alt Street. I spent most of my childhood in the Midwest. I grew up just outside Detroit. My father was an entrepreneur and did a number of different businesses, and my mother worked as a social worker for many years. And we grew up in sort of the most traditional Midwestern middle-class lifestyle that you could probably imagine. Well, my first job, I had a lot of jobs as a kid. I like to say I was the last paper boy in America, delivering the local newspaper twice a week on my bike. I also, did all the fun things that kids did, at least back then in the Midwest, which was, shovel sidewalks, mow lawns, things like that. Probably my first sort of real job was as a caddy. And I also cleaned offices for a period of time, along with a number of other odds and ends. So I did a whole bunch of different jobs, always hustling to make a few bucks to have some spending money in my pocket. The biggest thing from the caddy days is probably how important it is to build longer-term relationships with folks. I think a lot of people who did that would just sort of, there's one golfer, there's the next golfer, you don't really think about it. But I think a big part of what made me more successful as a caddy, and honestly made the job a lot better, was having regular loops with people who I got to know, who felt comfortable with me, and building those relationships. And it meant, whereas some people wouldn't necessarily be able to have reliable work on a day-to-day basis when they were a caddy and showed up. I always knew that I had, a couple of jobs a day, which was made it a lot easier. My academic training was primarily actually in botany. For a long time, I thought I was going to be a research scientist. But over the course of my college time, I actually, a very interesting path, sort of got really into public health issues, global public health issues, and advocacy related to the HIV and AIDS pandemic on an international scale, government response to the HIV pandemic, and started to increasingly recognize that topics related to sort of macroeconomics were important drivers of public health. And so I actually got really into pursuing a career in macro as a function of basically saying, I didn't take any classes in economics or in macro or anything like that, but basically said, look, I can go take a job in markets and macro, and they'll pay me to get essentially a master's degree in this area. And that was that was pretty compelling when I was thinking about sort of how do I better understand global public health, global markets, global economies, because they really, from a macro perspective, because that really sets the foundation of how the world works. For someone like myself who was not connected in any way, shape, or form to elite institutions, or with essentially no access to the world of the elite academic world or business world, it was a critical way to get my foot in the door and build relationships there. I think, growing up in Detroit, most people went to the University of Michigan, which is a fantastic school. Both my parents graduated from there. But there was something that was remarkably, different about going into an Ivy League school, which basically everyone who got into school on merit all had something truly unique and outstanding about what they were able to do, a unique passion, a unique skill, and they were working hard to develop that and succeed related to it. And that created a real vibrancy that wasn't just, you go to school, you take classes, and you move on. It was really an intellectual vibrancy and exceptionalism around, of all the different types of people that were around me. And so I found that to be really inspiring and really energizing. What I was really focused on coming out of school was trying to learn as much as I could about macro markets. And when you interview in the world of finance or consulting or investing, there's a lot of places where what you're pursuing is a particular type of job, a particular role in a particular field, or maybe you're a consultant, so you sort of dabble in a bunch of different things. And what I really wanted to do was sort of roll up my sleeves and really get a deep understanding of how the macroeconomy and markets work. I was lucky enough to get hired at Bridgewater Associates coming right out of school, which was one of the few places where people coming out of their undergraduate careers could really get that depth and richness of understanding in the macroeconomy and markets. And part of the reason why that was a real focus that they had on sort of starting from the foundations and building from the foundations up. So even someone like myself with a degree in botany and not that much experience academically in macroeconomics could learn, develop an understanding, and contribute. Much of my earlier career was in public markets in the 2 and 20 world. And so it was a unique opportunity to work at Circle Up to move to the venture side of 2 and 20. And I think not only was it a particularly interesting environment to sit on the side of the capital allocator and see and understand how individual businesses interact with the venture world and with getting financing. But I also saw a lot of the limitations of that business. We were sort of at the cutting edge of thinking about venture using big data to identify unique early stage consumer opportunities. And that was really novel in the world of venture capital. Most venture capital allocators, they're doing today the same thing that they've done for 20, 30 years, which is kind of stare into the eyes of the entrepreneur, maybe run a few numbers, and ultimately just kind of take a guess as to whether one particular product will be more successful than another. We were using big data and models to be able to understand that, but it highlighted just how much of a gap there was in that world where despite that approach, we were still charging investors 2 and 20. And the results that they were getting, even if we were very successful, just weren't that compelling relative to what they could do on their own. So it was another example where I could see, even at the cutting edge of the venture side of 2 and 20, those were businesses that were much better for the manager than they were for the investor. The inspiration behind GiveWell, at some level, was a very simple idea, which was that a couple of us who worked together and were friends at Bridgewater were thinking about where were we going to give our sort of end of year charitable donations. And it really started with a very simple question, which is just what is the most efficient way and most impactful way to give. And for those folks who give regularly to charity, there's all sorts of different causes that are out there, and what is very hard to determine as a person who's giving money is what is effective and what is not effective. At the time, the typical evaluators that were out there, the sort of GuideStar, evaluators that were out there, what they did is they evaluated how much of the capital was going to certain programming versus overhead, but gave essentially no insight into whether any of the programming was actually effective in doing what they claimed to do, let alone whether that would have a significant impact on the lives of people. And so the idea of systematic quantitative finance is really to understand sort of the core, engage in the analytical work necessary to understand sort of the fundamental rules of how markets work or how investing works. And in the same way, what we were trying to do with GiveWell was really deeply understand what were the core rules or ways in which particularly public health interventions, how they had an impact on whether it was, number of lives saved, quality of life, things like that. And so, we were approaching that question of how to get the most bang for your buck in terms of your charitable donation with the same sort of rigor that we would with, whether or not you should go long or short bonds.